Welcome back to Combat Mission Shock Force 2, where we are starting a new campaign, the US Marine campaign Semper Syria. This takes place in Shock Force's hypothetical 2008 setting, where a terrorist group based in Syria has detonated dirty bombs in a series of European and American cities. The Syrian regime has refused to hand over the culprits and mobilised to defend itself, leading to a full-scale invasion by an international coalition. On June the 15th, coalition air forces began to strike targets inside Syria. On the morning of the 19th, ground forces in Turkey and Iraq attacked across the border. One of the key coalition objectives is the city of Homs. Seizing this crossroads will isolate the capital of Damascus from the rest of the country and split the Syrian army into chunks that can be defeated in detail. As such, there are two main thrusts aimed at the city. In the east, the US Army's Task Force Thunder is punching across the desert via ashore and Palmyra. That's the base game's Task Force Thunder campaign. In the Semper Syria campaign, we're going to be playing as the US Marines in the west. The 26th Marine Expeditionary Unit aims to attack from the Mediterranean at Hamidiyah, securing a beachhead before driving on Homs through a gap in the mountains separating the coastal plain from the Syrian interior. The first stage of this is obviously getting ashore. The second stage is rapidly building up a force that the Syrians can't throw back into the sea. So the main focus of the landings is Beach Landing Zone White 2, just north of Hamidiyah, because, according to the briefing, this is one of the few LCAC capable beaches in the area of operations. LCACs, or Landing Craft Air Cushion, allow the Marines to get heavy equipment like tanks and vehicles ashore quickly without having to capture a port. So they're ideal for pumping forces into an initial lodgement secured by troops deploying via helicopter or AAV. Once BLZ White is in Marine hands, forces can push north to seize the port facilities at Tartus, only 20 kilometers to the north, to secure a more permanent logistics base. But first, we've got to make that initial lodgement. The coastline is defended by Syrian coastal defence battalions. These units aren't likely to offer much resistance to a full-on amphibious assault, but they do have the capacity to delay the Marines long enough for more capable Syrian Republican Guard and airborne forces to counterattack from positions inland. So a successful landing isn't good enough, we have to smash the coastal defences quickly to gain time to secure the beachhead. Luckily, the difficulties and risks of amphibious landings are balanced by one incredible advantage. The attacker can choose when and where to launch their attack and to concentrate combat power at that point in time and space. Here, that point is Beach Landing Zone White, on the northern edge of Hamidiyah. The area is split in two by a river. This is impassable except at two crossing points, a bridge where Route 2 crosses the map north to south, and at the eastern end. To the south of the river, our right, is the town of Hamidiyah itself. This is a complex urban area with a lot of open ground between buildings. Most of these are single or double story, but there are larger buildings mixed in, most conspicuously a large mosque in the centre of town. North of the river, on our left, the ground is much less dense. On the left map edge to the west of Route 2, there is what appears to be a resort complex. On the other side of the road there is a small hill, and from here the ground is completely open in an arc that follows the river back round to the beach. This area is totally overlooked by the resort, the highway, and Hamidiyah. At 0200 on the 21st of May, we're going to be landing a small force to conduct area reconnaissance immediately prior to the assault. Specifically, we're going to be landing 1st Platoon, B Company, 2nd Recon Battalion. This is made up of a platoon HQ, 3 6-man squads and 2 forward observer teams for a total of 26 men. These Force Recon Marines are well trained, well led, highly motivated and heavily armed, but their main assets in this mission will be stealth and night vision equipment. This platoon doesn't have the firepower to get into a protracted fight or the numbers to sustain casualties. It will be well supported by off-map assets though. The USS Mason is already on hand to provide naval gunfire support with its 5-inch gun. After 5 minutes, it will be joined by the USS Samson. Then at the 15-minute mark, a pair of Marine F-18 Super Hornets will come on station. First Platoon has 3 objectives. First, we need to check BLZ White 2 is clear of mines and obstacles that might obstruct the landings by touching 3 areas of beach, BLZ White 2 North, Centre and South. Second, we also need to touch the Route 2 bridge over the river at named area of interest 3 to assess whether it can support heavy traffic like tanks. Finally, we need to occupy 3 positions in order to support the landings later in the morning. These are OP-101, the hill on the left map edge beyond Route 2, and OPs 103 and 104, which are multi-storey buildings on the eastern edge of Hamidiyah, overlooking the approaches inland. In addition to these objectives, any targets of opportunity, such as enemy headquarters teams and heavy equipment that present themselves, should be prioritised for destruction by the supporting assets in order to assist the landings. Defending this area are elements of the Syrian 4th Coastal Defence Battalion. This type of unit is poorly armed and equipped, with what few armoured vehicles and ATGMs they are equipped with being old and obsolete. They're mostly deployed in urban areas to minimise the effectiveness of coalition air power. Pre-battle reconnaissance has identified a handful of enemy infantry positions in buildings near the Route 2 bridge and on the far side of Hamidiyah. A few scattered light vehicle positions and some fortifications, including barbed wire obstacles and trenches. There is a significant amount of coalition air and naval power in the Mediterranean on hand to support the marine assault, some of which has already been preparing beach landing zone wide, as evidenced by the fires and craters. There are 2 hours on the clock for this mission, which is plenty of time to get everything done. While I need to have at least 1 unit on the Hamidiyah side of the river to check BLZ white to south, I don't want to commit to that urban area any more than I absolutely have to. My core advantage lies in being able to see further than the enemy in the dark. Operating in the streets is going to compromise that. So my main effort is going to be on the left. After checking the beaches, the platoon will take up positions on the edge of the open ground to observe the enemy and plot the path of least resistance, using naval gunfire and aircraft to support as necessary. After reaching Route 2 and occupying OP-101, the plan is to swing right to check the Route 2 bridge and then move on to OPs 103 and 104. The first thing the recon marines are confronted with as they come ashore are some burning bunkers. They obviously aren't a threat anymore, and any nearby enemy troops have clearly found somewhere else to be, so checking the beach objectives is simple enough. Spreading out from there, 3rd Squad takes up a position on the left, looking down a shallow gully between the resort and the map edge. 2nd Squad sets up in a small copse in the centre to eyeball the open ground ahead, and 1st Squad stays on the right to cover one of the FO teams on the other side of the river as they occupy a building that will allow them to cover the left. After a few minutes, it's clear that there are a few enemy positions that I'm going to have to deal with. On the left, there's a trench with a barbed wire obstacle at the far end of the resort complex. In the centre, there's a V-shaped trench on the other side of Route 2, and one of the buildings near the Route 2 bridge is covered by wire. Finally, on the right, there are a series of trenches on the far bank, obviously sited to exploit fields of fire over the open ground in the centre. None of these positions appear to be occupied. It's not clear whether the enemy have abandoned them due to the preparatory bombardment, or have simply dug a lot of positions over a wide area so that they can occupy the most relevant one when coalition forces show their hand. At the same time though, I'm looking at trenches 200 to 300 meters away through night vision optics on an overcast night, so there may well be enemy troops that I simply can't see. Settling in to observe, the only Syrians I've spotted after 20 minutes are men manning a Dushka heavy machine gun in the central V-shaped trench. That's probably a good indicator that the other positions are indeed unoccupied, and while discouraging the HMG team with some naval gunfire, I can start planning my way forward. Going up the middle, across that open ground, is probably a non-starter. Even hidden in the darkness, that route is clearly a fire sack. It's covered on 2 sides by enemy trench lines, and it's not clear if the enemy is in the resort complex too. Going through the resort is risky for the same reason I declined to deploy into Hamidiyah itself, but sneaking up the far left, between the resort and the left map edge, looks like a good option. I'll be screened somewhat from the town by the resort, and although there is a wired up trench at the far end of this route, it doesn't look like it extends all the way across the gap. In any case, it's a small target for the offshore destroyers to focus on, and the number of positions the enemy could take inside the resort is similarly limited compared to those they could take around the centre. Having been operating near the close end of the resort for a good while now without any problems, it seems safe enough, so I send 1st Squad and an FO to get up onto the roofs of the closest buildings to cover 3rd Squad as they start to probe down the gully. As the platoon redeploys, they spot some enemy activity in the distance. Soon it looks like there are 2 enemy patrols heading towards the beach on either side of the river. The central patrol stops in the V-shaped trench next to Route 2, but the other looks to be continuing through the streets in Hamidiyah, where it could potentially find my lone FO by the riverbank. I'm focused on redirecting the naval guns on them when a 3rd patrol pops up in the resort complex. 3rd squad on the left goes firm, hiding out in the end of the shallow gully, while 1st squad on the resort roofs keeps track of the incoming enemy soldiers. 2nd squad in the centre has an oblique line of fire over the middle of the resort too, and if necessary, I can adjust the naval gunfire to support if I'm prepared to take the risk of a danger close fire mission. The Syrians steadily advance until they have 2 squads occupying a small building on the left of the resort complex, only 50 meters away from 3rd squad. This is far too close for comfort, even though they don't have any night vision, so I start crawling 3rd squad back and hit the building with the guns. This causes some casualties, but ultimately the Syrians inside have congregated on the ground floor and evidently decided that they should stay there where they're relatively safe, instead of taking the ideal option of running away. That's pretty aggravating. We're getting towards the end of the first hour here, and I'm really feeling the need to get a move on. Deciding to take a chance, I start quietly pushing one of 3rd Squad's fire teams forward to see if they can sneak past. This doesn't work. The Syrians open fire in the dark, forcing the team to go to ground. Somehow, they get away without taking any casualties, and, with the cat out of the bag, the recon platoon returns fire. The enemy in the first house are rapidly hosed down with small arms fire and 40mm grenades, but 1st Squad's rooftop muzzle flashes light them up for another Syrian squad in a 2nd house just right of the original contact. My luck holds though, with the enemy managing to miss with the RPGs they get off, and the Marines quickly gain fire superiority. Keeping this up, I send a team from 3rd Squad to tackle the 1st house. This isn't ideal, and it's really risky, but I can only attack or disengage here, and if I disengage, I'm not getting any closer to tackling my objectives. The 3rd Squad team moves up and starts engaging through the window at point blank range, but inside there's a pile of enemy casualties and a handful of Syrians trying to surrender. This is something of an awkward moment for a reconnaissance mission, but there will be plenty of Marines around in the next few hours, so as 3rd Squad moves in and takes prisoners, I can only assume they zip tie them, disable their weapons, and leave them there to get picked up later. The 2nd house goes the same way a few minutes later. Somehow I've managed to get away with bumping into and neutralising an entire enemy platoon without taking any casualties. At the same time, I've called off the naval gunfire. The resort firefight was really at too close range for it to help out safely, and instead I've started directing the F-18s in. After one pass failed to find any targets of opportunity, I start ordering them to hit specific points. The first of these is a building next to the V-shaped trench in the centre. That position is my next port of call after getting through the resort. It can cover both the back way into Hamidiyah and the Route 2 bridge. Plus, there have been a few enemy infantry contacts lurking about in that general area. A couple of 2,000-pound JDAMs is enough to collapse the building. Meanwhile, a quick reorg after the resort firefight reveals that I've burnt through a lot of ammunition. I really can't afford to get into another firefight. But on the plus side, I've made so much noise and stirred up such a fuss that any enemy troops on this side of the map must have been alerted, and with no spots having popped up elsewhere in the resort or the trenches on the left, I think it's safe to assume that this area is as clear as it's going to be. Pushing past the trenches, 3rd Squad crosses Route 2 and occupies OP-101. Seeing as though they're the squad with the least ammunition, they can stay there. Getting up onto the rooftop of another multi-storey resort building to get eyes on the next chunk of ground I want to cover reveals something unexpected in the distance. On the far side of the map, stationed at the eastern exit to Hamidiyah, is a static T-54. This is exactly the kind of target that needs to be destroyed before the landings, so I start vectoring in one of the F-18s. The other one is already being directed at the OP-104 building. This is not only the furthest objective from my current position, but being surrounded by a tall compound wall, it's probably also going to be a dangerous position to occupy if the enemy are set up to defend it. I don't think I'm going to be able to take it, so I'm instead going to deny it to the enemy. There are plenty of other buildings that can serve as OPs for the recon marines. The T-54 is violently deleted, and the OP-104 building hammered immediately afterwards, being decapitated before a follow-up strike knocks it down completely. The F-18 strikes have necessitated a pause for the recon marines. Having secured OP-101 and the resort complex, I'm reluctant to start moving again before an FO is freed up to coordinate the naval guns. This proves to be a wise decision, checking out one of the outer resort buildings on the other side of Route 2 to make sure I won't be shot in the back, crossing the next stretch of open ground. A pair of Marines from 2nd Squad find it full of Syrians, who inflict my first casualty. With limited ammunition and no doors or windows facing the resort complex for me to snipe through, I decide to pull my squads back to a safe distance and simply direct the Navy to remove the offending building. This works, but it eats up more time. Coming into the final half hour, I'm sending 1st Squad to check the Route 2 bridge, backed up by 3rd Squad, who have been replaced on OP-101 by the FO team, and sending 2nd Squad and the platoon HQ across the river further up to close with the OP-103 building. 1st and 3rd cautiously advanced through the V-shaped trench, finding some surviving enemy infantry on one of the buildings who put up cursory resistance before they surrender. From there, it's only a short hop across to the next building, which is clear, and then only a few more meters to touch the bridge objective. 2nd Squad has a more complex task. Despite some preparation for the naval guns, OP-103 is occupied by unconventional troops, who open up on the squad's base of fire. Joined by the platoon HQ, who have brought plenty of 5.56 ammo with them, the squad quickly shuts down the enemy shooters, and a dash across the street by an assault element is enough to seize the building. Supporting fire from offshore is grinding down potential enemy positions further south towards what's left of OP-104, but I don't have the time or ammunition to try and grab that objective as well. I'm even more discouraged after a free chunk of shrapnel incapacitates 2nd Squad sword gunner, and when the platoon HQ reaches OP-103 and discovers enemy troops in the next building over, still willing to fight. There's not enough time to resolve that problem though, and the battle ends with a total victory for the Marines. I've sustained 2 casualties, 1 dead, the Marine outside the resort, plus 1 wounded right at the end. The Syrians meanwhile have lost 74 men, including 11 taken prisoner, plus a static T-54. I've failed to occupy OP-104, but hit all my other objectives. OPs 101 and 103 are in Marine hands, and all 3 BLZ White 2 zones have been checked, along with the Route 2 bridge. That's helped clear the way for the initial amphibious landing. It's now 0400, and the recon Marines can settle into their OP positions to coordinate further air and naval strikes in support of Gulf and Fox companies, who will be coming ashore via helicopter and AAV at 0500. So, a successful start to the campaign, one of the more unusual and difficult to pull off types of combat mission scenario, but well made and deceptively difficult. I was almost out of small arms ammunition by the end, which goes to show that this was a lot closer than it might look. Also well aware that I got very, very lucky. In the next mission, we'll be back to something more conventional, securing the bridgehead for the follow-on LCACs with Gulf and Fox companies. Hope you all enjoyed this one and found it interesting. If you'd like to watch these videos early and support the channel, you can do so via Patreon and YouTube memberships. Whether you do or not, thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next video.